Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Jan Roller, a partner at the law firm of Davison Young, and a past president of the City Club's Board of Directors. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, author and respected European travel expert, Rick Steves. Rick took his first trip to Europe in 1969, visiting piano factories with his father, a piano importer. By the time he reached 18, he jokes, I realized I didn't need my parents to travel. He began traveling on his own then, funding his trips by teaching piano lessons. In 1976, he started Rick Steves Europe, a business that has grown from a one-man operation to a company with a well-traveled staff of 90 full-time employees. In 1980, he self-published the first edition of his travel skills book, Europe Through the Back Door. He has also written more than 50 other guidebooks, phrase books, and pocket guides. For several years, Rick Steves Italy has been the best-selling international guidebook sold in the United States. On a personal note, Europe Through the Back Door proved an invaluable guidebook to my family when we took our sons to Europe in 2001. On many nights, we passed it around the dining room table and had each boy read a couple paragraphs so we could learn the more interesting local experiences, foods, and activities for our trip. In 2009, Rick tackled a new genre of travel, writing with travel as a political act, reflecting on how a life of travel has broadened his own perspectives and how travel can be a significant force for peace and understanding in the world. He advocates for thoughtful travel, becoming a temporary local in the places we travel to gain a better understanding of how others perceive us. As stated in a recent interview with Cleveland.com, he states, I am trying to inspire Americans to get out of their comfort zones. The world is not a pyramid with us on top. Travel, he argues, in the 2004 USA Today editorial, can provide us with a better understanding of our place in this complex planet and help us fit in more comfortably. And perhaps we wouldn't need to spend as much as the rest of the world combined on our military to feel safe. With that perspective, it is only fitting that he is the featured speaker tonight at the Breen Center at St. Ignatius High School in an interactive discussion with our own Dan Malthrop from here at the City Club as part of International Partners in Mission's 40th anniversary, which is celebrated here in Cleveland. IPM helps Americans get out of their comfort zone by leading life-changing immersion trips to visit their project partners in countries such as Kenya, India, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. My sister and I joined IPM on a trip of a lifetime to Kenya 2 years ago to see not only how life is lived in a primitive village and IPM's other projects there, but also the wonders on safari in the Masai Mara. More information about IPM is available on your tables and outside the room here today. In addition to being a respected author, Rick is also a television personality. Over the past 20 years, he has hosted more than 100 travel shows for public television. His Rick Steves Europe TV series is carried by over 300 stations, reaching 95% of the US markets. He has also created 2 award-winning specials for public television, Rick Steves European Christmas and the groundbreaking Rick Steves Iran. In 2005, he expanded into radio, starting the weekly public radio program Travel with Rick Steves. Although he spends about a third of every year in Europe, Rick still has plenty of time for civic advocacy and philanthropic pursuits. He is on the advisory board of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. He's just come from Oregon, where he lent his support for Measure 91, which aims to regulate, legalize, and tax recreational marijuana for adults in that state. He is also an avid supporter of the arts and solutions to end homelessness. Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the City Club, give a warm welcome to Rick Steves.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with the City Club of Cleveland, and it's a fun challenge for me to share with you the value of travel. I've spent a third of my adult life living out of a 9 by 22 by 14 inch carry-on the airplane sized suitcase. hanging out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. And it's let me take home what I think is the very most beautiful souvenir. It's a broader perspective. And then when I implement that global perspective right here as a citizen of this great country, that's making travel a political act. And that's what I'd just like to talk about for just a few minutes. Travel lets us get out of our comfort zone. Travel lets us appreciate things we wouldn't appreciate if we just stayed home. And when it's done thoughtfully, I just think it's a great way to spend a little extra time and money as you go through your life. You gain an appreciation of nature. We've got some beautiful nature in the United States. My beat is Europe, and the nice thing about Europe's nature is it's so accessible. You know, people can ride the lift up to the top of the mountain and have breakfast in a revolving restaurant, and then tightrope on a ridge for 3 hours. Imagine tightroping on a ridge. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eigermonk in Jungfrau, cut glass peaks. And ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. That's enough to make a Lutheran raise their hands to the sky. You gain an appreciation of nature for the rest of your life. You also gain an appreciation for culture. Now, as a tour guide for 25 years, I noticed a lot of Americans are threatened when somebody's more sophisticated about something than they are. It's not that they're better, they're just excited about it. It's like show and tell. Cheese. Go to France, and cheese is a big deal. When I was raised, cheese was nothing special. It's orange in the shape of the bread. Here, cheese sandwich. You go over there, they're evangelical about their cheese. You step into a cheese shop, it's a festival of mold. The cheesemonger takes a moldy wad of goat cheese, deep whip. Oh, Monsieur Steve, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. It smells like the feet of baseball players to me, but whatever. Yeah. Now, they're excited about cheese. I don't need to be excited about stinky cheese, but it's nice to know some people are. Also, with travel, you get out of your comfort zone. I love to be in a situation where I'm the person who's stared at. It's very helpful. And it doesn't need to be earth-shaking experiences. I was in Italy recently, and this little kid was staring at me. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." I said, "Well, what's with that?" He said, "Well, last week we were at McDonald's, and my son, noticing the fluffy white buns, said, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' He said, 'Son, it's because Americans have no teeth.'" Now, he didn't mean anything by that. Dads just say silly things to their kids when they're out with them, you know. But the little boy was confused, and he stared at me, and I showed him my teeth to overcome that little bit of misunderstanding between people. And it's just a reminder that there are goofy little misunderstandings, and when we travel, we better empathize with other people. We understand them better. It makes it more tough for their propaganda to demonize us, and it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them. It's simply people to people. My beat is Europe, and exciting stuff is going on in Europe as they have worked on their unification. Of course, a lot of people will put down Europe for its over-the-top regulations and its political correctness. Imagine sitting on the rubble of a bombed-out continent in 1947. A caring citizen realized we've got to do something radical so our kids aren't digging out after a war like we've done twice in our lifetimes. And they decided we need to knit our economies together, and they set out to do that. It's not easy because you have to talk sovereign nations into trading away sovereignty for meaningful union. It's been a stuttering, awkward, ungraceful evolution, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. A lot of times Americans will celebrate the step back, but Europe is here to stay. And Europe is a triumph in the sense, if nothing else, that there will never again be a big war between France and Germany. For that reason alone, the European Union is a beautiful thing. Now, Europe has also created a free trade zone to compete with the United States of America. Europe is a free trade zone of 400 million people producing roughly $15 trillion of stuff a year to compete with us. A free trade zone of 300 million people producing roughly the same $15 trillion of stuff a year. A lot of times we're sort of offended or challenged by Europe's social sensibilities, and it's understandable a lot of Americans would say, well, look at those idealistic, naive European liberals. They don't produce as much as we do per person, you know. We make as much with 300 million as they make with 400 million. Well, that's true, but it's not the full analysis. If that person was giving you a complete analysis, he would also add that Europeans choose to work 20% fewer hours and willingly make 20% fewer stuff so they can spend more time with their families. It's not right or wrong, it's just a European sensibility. I'm certainly glad I'm running my business here. It's fun to employ people. I make a lot of money, I employ people really well, and we produce good stuff. I would be demoralized as an entrepreneur in Europe but we can learn from Europe and they can learn from us. And one thing about Europeans is, by any honest measure, they produce as much per person as we produce per person, and they just spend more time playing. I know it's annoying, but they play a lot. I was in Amsterdam just doing my research a couple years ago, and I saw, 8 grown men in a little boat on Wednesday afternoon. I thought, am I missing some kind of a festival? I asked them, hey, what's going on? And they said, it's Wednesday. We cut out of work every Wednesday and have fun with our friends. It's just, again, it's not right or wrong. It's just an option, and we Americans are more inclined to have, enthusiastically have the shortest vacations in the rich world and work ourselves into an early grave. That's our work ethic. Now, the exciting thing for me as a travel writer and a tour organizer about Europe is the diversity. And you'd think as Europe is uniting, it would become homogenized in one big strip mall. 300 million people with the same coins jangling in their pockets, no more borders, and so on. But the counterintuitive result of Europe's union is more ethnic diversity. More diversity as you travel. That's because in our lifetime, the news has been filled with regions challenging nations. And as Europe is uniting and power is going to Brussels, nations make less of an impact. Therefore, nations are less threatened by regions that want to wave their flag and speak their language. Today, more people are speaking the little languages of Europe than they were a generation ago, which is quite astounding when you think of the way the world is getting more united and big is more viable. I think when you think about Europe, if you met a person in Munich and you said, where are you from? He might say, I'm Bavarian, he might say, I'm German, or he might say, I'm European. Now, Brussels funds and promotes ethnic regions rather than political units made with borders drawn after wars that ignore ethnic makeup of the regions. And today, when you go around Europe, at every city hall, you'll find 3 flags: the region, the country, and Europe. It's exciting to think about how, in our lifetime, these headlines have been filled by Basque people threatening Madrid, Celtic people in Brittany threatening Paris, Scottish and Irish people threatening London. Now, London, Paris, and Madrid are letting those regions wave their flags with a little more vigor. Think about it. Just recently, Scotland was given a chance to vote themselves independence. A few years ago, Scotland was giving its own parliament building for the first time in Scotland since 1707. This is big news. Now, I mentioned there's more diversity, and you see that when you travel. If you go to Barcelona, for instance, and go to an ATM machine, you'll find 4 languages that are spoken in Spain on the top 4 buttons of that ATM machine. Catalan for people in Catalonia, Espanol for most Spanish people, Gallego for the people of Galicia up in the northwest, and Euskara for Basque people. Then there's a button for the Germans, the French, the English, and another button for everybody else. Now, if you were to go to Basque country, you'd find those same 4 buttons on the top. Basque would be first, but Catalan would be up there. Not because Catalonians couldn't speak Spanish or English, but as a matter of solidarity for their fellow, nations without states, which is a very interesting thing in Europe. In Europe, you've got a system where the rich countries give in more and take out less, and the poor countries take out more and give in less, because that economic union is only as strong as its weakest link. For instance, when I was first traveling in Europe, the 4 poor countries, Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland, had no freeways. Now they're laced with modern German-style freeways, and when I go to a new freeway in Ireland, I see a sign with a European flag on it saying, this building project received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. In other words, Germans and French built this road in Ireland. Now you Irish people should use it because we're keeping up with the United States. All my life, when I go to Greece, I've crossed the Gulf of Corinth in a funky Greek ferry. A couple years ago, I come back and I find this shiny new bridge, and I think, my goodness, that's not a Greek bridge, that's a German bridge, built in Greece to get German trucks filled with gummy bears over the Gulf of Corinth down into the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Europe is investing in its infrastructure like we can hardly imagine. I mean, every time I go there, it's just breathtaking. The Hauptbahnhof in Berlin, shiny new train station, 1,000 trains coming and going every day at right angles on different levels. I was just in a train station in Munich taking pictures of trains coming into the station, specifically cute little birds squished to the windshields of trains coming into the station. I know, it's a very dangerous continent if you're a slow bird. Now, all my life, or until well into my adulthood, I thought the world was a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. And then I realized when I traveled that, everybody doesn't have the American dream. Everybody doesn't have the 4th of July. Everybody doesn't have Nathan Hale, Patrick Henry, and Ethan Allen. They've got their own Nathan Hales that we don't even know. The Nelson Mandelas, the Archbishop Oscar Romeros, these are the Nathan Hales of other countries. And it is really, I think, healthy and instructive to embrace those Nathan Hales as well as our own, and to understand that everybody doesn't have the American dream. That's not a bad thing. I love the American dream because I'm an American. But Sri Lankans have the Sri Lankan dream. Norwegians have the Norwegian dream. Moroccans have the Moroccan dream, and that's something to celebrate, not to be threatened by. And there are challenges and pride and spine and struggles on this planet that we are completely clueless to, oblivious. As a tour guide, I love going around Turkey, especially Eastern Turkey. It's a Muslim nation of 70 million people, 95% practicing Muslims. When you travel there, you see, I think, an exciting society, not living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, getting it together. Amazing challenges, amazing accomplishments. As a tour guide, I love going through Eastern Turkey. There's not a lot of famous sites in Eastern Turkey. You've just got it's a cultural scavenger hunt. And I've got 25 people on my bus with my Turkish tour guide at my side, and we're looking for interesting things. In the shadow of Mount Ararat, we find a high school stadium filled with kids. They're having some kind of rally. Stop the bus, go in. You find 200 high school kids thrusting their fist up in the air, singing in unison, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." I asked my guide, "What's going on here? Don't they like God?" She said, "Oh no, we love God here in Turkey, but considering the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism just over the border to our east, we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state in our country." Separation of mosque and state? Whoa, I didn't even consider that in an Islamic country, but that's what the rally was all about. It was a pep rally for secularism. All over the world, there are exciting things going on. Later on that trip, we came into a village that I think had never seen in another American. 25 of us come into the town. The woodcarver's the big shot in the town. Everybody in every village nearby wants a prayer niche carved by this guy. We gather around, he does his work. Suddenly, he's proud, he stops, he holds his chisel high into the sky, and he declares a man and his chisel, the greatest factory on earth. He didn't need me to encourage him to go to night school to get computer literate. That man is fulfilled. He's found his niche. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Now, we have a lot of liberty here in the United States, but there's other countries that have every bit as much, and they're proud of it, as you'll notice when you travel. And I just love the way cultures work to pass their proud traditions on from one generation to the next. In a little town in Italy, every summer, there's a festival where the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. That's a beautiful thing. A little town in France where they make wine, the Chamber of Commerce gathered its money to make beautiful glass orbs where a visitor can appreciate the fine differences in the bouquet of that Burgundy region from all the different wines. A good nose is a life skill worth investing in Burgundy. In so much of Europe, people willingly, in fact eagerly, pay too much for their loaf of bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. They like to go to the market every morning and connect with their neighbors. Europeans appreciate their fine wine, and they know how to fill it up really cheap, okay? There are filling stations, literal filling stations, where Italians will stop and take their empty jugs and fill up the table wine, and it's the cheapest liquid you can buy in Italy. It's interesting to me when you compare different societies. America and Europe, to me, are good case studies, the differences. And one thing different about America from Europe is we are so willing to legislate morality. My friends in Europe tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. Then they always remind me we Americans lock up 10 times as many people per capita as Europeans do. Either we are inherently more criminal or there's something screwy about our laws. It's got to be one or the other. And I don't think we're inherently more criminal people. Prostitution's a good example. Nobody would say prostitution's a good thing. There's always going to be prostitution. There's always going to be lonely, horny men with money that want to buy sex and women willing to sell it, okay? No matter how strict the laws are. Now, Europe has no more prostitution than we do here in the United States, but it's open in Europe. They've got brothels and they've got red light districts. And it's a matter of, rather than moralizing and incarcerating, it's what Europeans call pragmatic harm reduction. How can we minimize harm in our society? Get over the moralizing, deal with the reality. And the idea is a prostitute is an independent business person, and she has to be checked by doctors in order to be clean and not spreading diseases in order to get her license, and she does that every 6 months. And if she has a dangerous client and she pushes her emergency button, she's not rescued by a pimp, but she's rescued by a policeman. That's the ideal. It doesn't work perfectly, but that's the attempt. When it comes to hard drug abuse, we can learn a lot from Europe, I think. Hard drug abuse is a horrible problem on both sides of the Atlantic. If you're in a fancy restaurant in a poor city in Europe and you go down to the toilet, you step in, you may be blindsided by blue lights. Why? Because with blue lights, you cannot see your veins. Really frustrating if you want to shoot up. There's a lot of junkies on the streets in Europe, and they want a safe place to go and shut the door and have some light so they can do their work. Can't do it in this restaurant. Now, across the street, there would be a machine that used to sell tobacco, cigarettes. Now it's been rejiggered, and it sells government-subsidized syringes. A lot of Americans say, you're just enabling these people to use drugs. If you give them syringes, Europeans would say they're addicted. They're going to be using drugs anyways. They're going to be sharing needles and spreading HIV, or we can provide them needles and we won't have that problem. It's pragmatic harm reduction. And then down the street there would be something called a cafe fix, a government-subsidized heroin maintenance clinic where people go to administer their addiction. In much of Europe, the word for addiction is enslaved. These people are not criminals. They're sick people. They don't need cops and judges and lawyers. They need doctors and they need counselors. We have 1% of our society dealing with hard drug addiction problems. They have 1% of their society dealing with hard drug addiction problems. Before our war on drugs, we had 1%. Now we have 1%. It's just a reality. We lose twice as many people per capita to heroin overdoses as Europe does. On a typical year, we lose 18,000 people. They lose 8,000 people. They're dealing with their drug-addicted population in a pragmatic, harm reduction kind of way. A lot of my tourists will say, look at these naive Europeans. They're so liberal. They've got all these drug addicts on the streets. They got the same number of drug addicts. Theirs are just alive and not in jail. Cafe fix. Marijuana is an interesting issue. In the United States, we lock up 800,000 people a year, or arrest 800,000 people a year for marijuana. We have 80,000 people in jail today for marijuana offenses. Nonviolent marijuana possession. These are not rich white guys that are getting arrested for marijuana. These are poor people and people of color. It's a very clever way for our society to disenfranchise black people. It's the new Jim Crow. I've worked very hard trying to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana in the Northwest. We legalized marijuana 2 years ago in Washington State and in Colorado. I was a co-sponsor of that bill. And I just spent a week visiting 10 cities in 6 days in Oregon, and they're going to be voting on that coming up. And it is not pro-pot. My co-sponsors were the elected city prosecuting attorney, the Republican-appointed federal prosecutor, presidents of bar associations, city leaders, state leaders who have dedicated their life to the well-being of children and public safety. These are public safety laws. These are civil liberties laws. These are take the money away from organized crime. Apples were rivaled by marijuana as the biggest cash crop in our state recently, and then put that money into legitimate businesses that are taxed, heavily taxed, and earmark the money generated for drug treatment programs and drug education and health. We're generating $100 million a year in taxes in my state. I just was having lunch with my governor, and he said, thankfully, we don't have to lock up 5,000 people this year that we would have had to lock up had you guys not won 2 years ago. I've saved millions of dollars, and our policemen can focus on serious crimes. So when you do hear the discussion about marijuana, I challenge you to remember it's not pro-marijuana. It's anti-prohibition. It is smart policy. Nobody in my camp is pro-marijuana. The Children's Alliance of my state endorsed our law. The NAACP endorsed our law. And with a track record now, we see that there's not a reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives if only it was legal to smoke pot. People who smoke pot, want to smoke pot, do already. And my strong belief is, and it's bared out by the track record of every society that's dealt with this smartly, use is not correlated to how strict the laws are. Use will not go up when you take the crime out of the equation. That's what we've learned from Europe. There's so many ways we can learn through our travels, and I love to have sounding boards in my travels. I've got a friend who's a school teacher in Switzerland. His name's Ollie. He's the only teacher in a little town where everybody has the same last name. It's a little peasant town high in the Alps, and I talk to Ollie and his wife Maria, and I say, you know, just anything that's on my mind. Ollie, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? And without missing a beat, he just says, well, what's it worth to live in a country where there's no homelessness, no hunger, and where everybody, regardless of how wealthy their parents are, has access to good health care and quality education? He's not a crusader. He's not a liberal. That's just a European sensibility. You know, Americans are compassionate people. We're caring people. But we're not very good at dealing with the gap between rich and poor. That's one thing you learn when you travel. And when you travel, you realize half of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. The average lot for women on this planet, mothers on this planet, is to abandon their kids every morning and walk many hours for water and firewood. This is a challenge for us, you know. We've got our economic crisis, I know, but there is also a challenge with the half of humanity trying to raise their kids on $2 a day. And I've found that when you travel, honestly, you have the window rolled down and you got those grubby little fingers coming in at you. It's awkward, but it's valuable, it's important. We need to get out there and better understand the rest of our world. And then you realize in poor countries, even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's not a nice place to call home. South of our border, any middle-class neighborhood has to pool its money so they can hire an armed guard so the kids can get to the park safely. Down in Central America, there's an armed guard in front of every bank, pharmacy, and hotel. That's coming our way. If we don't deal with the gap between rich and poor, we'll have the same thing in our society. And even if you can afford to live behind designer fortifications, it's not a successful society. We've got the wherewithal to avoid this, but it's going to take some good, honest work on the part of the American citizenry. And one thing I've learned in my travels is my daughter is precious. My daughter is lovable, but she's no more precious and lovable than little kids living in a dump. My daughter's got $5,000 for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. And I noticed every kid in her class had the wherewithal to get braces. I know the average lot in life for kids is to try to have water, and their moms are gone getting water. And I know for the cost of 2 sets of braces, you could drill a well and give that thirsty little hardscrabble community running water so the moms could walk across the square instead of across the county each morning. That's not a guilt trip, that's an opportunity. That is very exciting. If you're into public national security, I would challenge you to think about soft power. For the cost of 1 soldier in Afghanistan, $1 million in 1 year, you could build 100 wells every year and give 100 communities, dusty, angry, frustrated communities with kids abandoned, you could give them running water and the moms could stay at home. And when they walked across the square in the morning and they pumped that water, they'd think, God bless America. That's soft power. Even if you only care about your own national security, that's a very good investment and worth considering. Let me just finish with one of my favorite little images as a tour guide that gets people out of their comfort zone, and to me that's what travel is so exciting about. In Turkey, I love to introduce my tour groups to a whirling dervish. You know, the guys that get all dizzy when they pray? And I found this guy finally, and I asked him, I'll just paraphrase, but I said, hi, I'm an American tour guide. I've got 20 American tourists, and we'd love to see you whirl. And he said, I'm not a photo op, but I'll let you watch me pray if I can explain to you what I'm doing. I said, great. So we went up onto his rooftop, and he said 5 times a day, I'll just paraphrase. He said 5 times a day I get up on my rooftop and I pray. I'm a follower, I'm a dervish, that's the Muslim equivalent of a monk. I follow Mevlana, or Rumi, as a lot of us know him, sort of the St. Francis of the Muslim faith, a guy that's really into love, easy for everybody to get their head around, you know? And 5 times a day I plant my foot in my community, my home, my loved ones. The other foot goes around the world, acknowledging the variety and the diversity on this great planet that God has blessed us with. My arm goes up to accept the love of our Maker, and the other hand, like the spout of a tea kettle, goes down, showering God's love on his creation. And I lose myself as I get into a meditative trance, spinning around, and I become a conduit of God's love, meditating on the teaching of my prophet. And as a tour guide, I looked at my group and I saw the wonder on their faces, and I just thought, this is really what travel is all about. To take something scary and a little bit freaky, to understand it, and to bring it home, a little less fear on this planet. We are living in fearful times these days. Our nation has never been more fearful. Think about it. Think of what's going on right now. Think of when we were young, they said bon voyage. What do they say now? Travel safely. I'll pray for you. Fear is for people who don't get out very much. And the flip side of fear is understanding. And we gain that understanding when we travel in a thoughtful way. We need to get out of our comfort zones to gain an empathy for the other 96% of humanity and to come home with a mindset that has us more inclined to build bridges and less inclined to build walls. And even if you're motivated only by national security, I find that's a very, very important attitude to have. And if you can learn that broader perspective, take it home, and then implement it as a citizen of this great nation, you are making travel a political act. Thank you very much.
Today we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Rick Steves, author and travel expert. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry the City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. On Wednesday, October 22nd, the City Club will host an Ohio gubernatorial debate with Democratic candidate Ed Fitzgerald and Green Party candidate Anita Rios. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today, we are also welcoming guests at the table hosted by John Carroll University. Thank you for your support. Our community partner for today's program is International Partners in Mission. We thank you for your support. Today, we welcome students from Gilmore Academy, Max S. Hayes High School, and Shaker Heights High School. Student participation was made possible by a generous gift from the Laub Foundation. We thank you for your support. Now, we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and Content Associate, Teddy Eisenberg, over there. So let's have our first question, please.
Hello, my name is Zoe Boyce, and I was wondering, you've been a lot of places, but where is your favorite place that you've been and why?
And why? Thank you, Zoe. My favorite place, I would say, is India. And a lot of people are surprised by that answer because I always write books about Europe. And for me, Europe is the wading pool for world exploration. But my hope is people get confident once they go to Europe and then get into places that are a little more challenging to us culturally. And I like India because it really humbles me from an ethnocentrism point of view. It just kind of wallops my cultural self-assuredness. I thought I was a good musician, and I knew all about music. And then I went to India, and I realized there's no meter, and there's no mode, and it's still classical music. Even if it doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense to my ears, people who are just as sophisticated in music enjoy that. I was raised thinking time is treated like money in my society. We bank it, we invest it, we waste it, we save it, all those things you do with money and you do with time. And in India, time is not money. And it can be very frustrating for a tourist because I want it now, you see. And it rearranged all my cultural furniture. So I really love India and the Indian subcontinent. I would say in Europe, my favorite place is Italy because Italy is the closest thing to India in that sense. In Europe, okay.
Could you please stand?
My name is Becky. We travel extensively, I think, compared to the average person, but there's some places we haven't been to yet, like Israel and Egypt, and some places we're very interested in going, but we're very concerned right now. I'd like your thoughts on the instability in areas and should it affect our travel plans?
Okay, thank you. This is an understandable concern. People have travel dreams taking them to places that are in the news, and their loved ones might think it's not safe to go there. In the last year, I've been in Egypt. I've been in Palestine and Israel and Turkey and Russia. And, you know, occasionally my loved ones will get me aside and say, Rick, do you think this is safe? And I'll tell them, as long as I'm not going through Chicago, I think I'll be fine. I mean, that's a funny line, but it's very serious. I mean, statistically, you are safer in Egypt or Palestine or Russia than you are in Chicago. I find that you need to exercise common sense, but nobody, I mean, Gaza's a different story. I'm talking about the West Bank. You know, it's got tourism. Their Lonely Planet guidebook sells very well. There's lots of Europeans traveling there. Very few Americans travel there. I would go, we've been taking tours to Turkey, organizing and leading tours since before the first Gulf War without a hitch. I'm the last one that's going to put my groups into any kind of danger, but I'm also the last one that's going to overreact to hysterical news. Remember, our news has a great impact on our perspective, doesn't it? And I believe back when Walter Cronkite said, some of you students are not old enough to remember that, but when Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, as he closed every news broadcast, I think to the best of their ability, that's the way it was. Because back then, the networks willingly lost money during the news hour because that was part of their contribution to our democracy, to our society. They would bring us straight news without having to juice it up and sex it up and spice it up, so a lot of people would watch and they could charge more to their advertisers. Of course, now we have a society that every corporation has a legal obligation to profit maximize in the short term for their stockholders, and the networks have got together and decided we've got to, it's pedal to the metal. We got to make money every minute that we're on the air, and that includes the news. Consequently, in the last few years, I believe in our society, news is actually entertainment masquerading as news. And I don't care what your politics are, that is a dangerous thing for our society. That causes us to overreact to things and do stuff that is just wacky and counterproductive and expensive and harmful. And then politicians have to jump on board because they don't want to be caught out of the mainstream created by hysterical news media. There should be an outcry in our society that has news not having to make money. Because as long as news has to make money, it's going to be hysterical and it's going to make all of us more afraid than we should be. It is not dangerous to travel. In fact, if all you care about is national security and your personal safety, the most dangerous thing that could happen is if we all stopped traveling. Because then we'd wake up one morning and we'd find it is dangerous. There's 96% of the world out there. You know, we like to think we're exceptional. I think, and I've traveled a fair amount, the only thing exceptional about us is our ability to think we're exceptional. It's a joy to celebrate the diversity on this planet, you know? Sure, there's problems. I don't want to make light of the problems, but all in all, things are pretty good right now, and we've got some serious issues that aren't even being talked about that are clearly more threatening to us than what we are talking about, and it comes down to news. So if you want to go to Turkey, if you want to go to Israel and Palestine or Russia, I'd say do it. Now, if you're going to a place like Egypt, you've got to make precautions because there's civil unrest on the streets, and you don't want to go to a demonstration unless you're looking for real adventure, you know, and I'm not. But for what you would spend to go to a normal hotel and have a normal trip in London, you take that money and go to the five-star international hotel in Cairo, and you have a guide with a car and a driver that comes through the security and picks you up, you'll be the only person at the pyramids at Giza. And you'll feel very safe, and you'll feel like it's a buyer's market when it comes to renting a camel. Yes?
Yes, Mr. welcome to Cleveland. I'm from Turkey.
You are? Nasılsın?
Now we know that your favorite city is Istanbul.
Yep.
Let
me clarify that. My favorite city, I'd say of 4 cities in Europe that are worth 1 week of a vacation, London, Paris, Rome, and clearly Istanbul is right up there with all of those. I love Istanbul.
Can you share your most memorable thing in Turkey? And also, I take a group of friends from Cleveland every year. What would your advice be specifically for Turkey, for our American friends visiting?
Oh, what would you have people do coming to Turkey? Thank you for the question. One of my favorite things in Turkey is playing backgammon. And if you don't play backgammon, learn to play backgammon. And part of my ethic when I'm in Turkey is every day I go into a tea house and play backgammon with a local. And if you don't know the rules, that's okay because somebody will move for you, okay? Everybody gathers around, and it's just so wonderful to go away from the tourists and play a little backgammon. But there's so many beautiful things that you can see and do in Turkey. We were just there with our public television crew and made 2 new shows that'll be airing this season on Turkey. I think I just told about the woodcarver and holding his chisel up, right? If you can get into places that don't see a lot of tourists, and then you don't need a list of famous sites. Turkish people it's a festival in the streets every day, and to be out and about, and because you're an American venturing into their town, you'll find people come out of the woodworks to talk to you. And if you go into a tea house, it's like a British pub, but a tea house, you will be, if you like to be, have no shortage of friends, and the person who speaks the best English will befriend you and introduce you to people. When I come into a little village in Turkey that's never seen a tourist, we go to I've got a Turkish guide, which helps, and we go to the mayor's house. And he's proud to have us in, and Turks love to dance, so we're all dancing like this. And then I'm the tour guide, so I'm the big shot, and he's the mayor, so he's the big shot. So he comes over to me, and he says, come over to this side of my house. And he goes, on the wall here is the most sacred place in my house. This is where I keep my Quran bag, where I keep my holy scriptures, you know, as a Muslim. And he said, in my Quran bag, I also keep a copy of the Bible and a copy of the Torah. Because the way I see it, Christians, Muslims, and Jews are all people of the book, children of the same God. These are the kind of little eurekas you have when you go and just meet people and better understanding. You certainly wouldn't get those kind of images staying home looking at the news, you see. You've got to go there. Thanks for your question. They don't allow women in those. Those women are the guests of honor in a tea house. That's my experience. That's my experience. And a woman it'll be quite a commotion if a woman challenges a man to a game of backgammon and she, by chance, wins. He'll never live it down. But I mean, a lot of Americans have a tough time with the way Muslims treat their women, and I think we have to be open-minded about this. I mean, you know, every society is on a different evolutionary track. 100 years ago, Christians, women were covering their hair, and in some denominations, Christian women still do cover their hair. I was just in Israel going to a Orthodox Jewish community, and women there have to cover their hair in public. Married women, the way I understand it, if they want to go out in public and show their hair, they have to wear a wig and show somebody else's hair. You know, now I'm not going to judge that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm not going to give that one little inch of judgment. I've talked to, if you are concerned about Muslim women having to cover their hair, I would recommend going to the greatest university in Palestine, as I did, and talk to young Muslim women who cover their hair and those who don't, who are friends together, and you'll find out the choices they make and why. It's beyond the scope of today's talk, but I did that when I was in the Holy Land, sitting there with 4 girls, 2 with scarves and 2 without, and they go to the same parties, they tell the same jokes, and the 2 who chose to wear a scarf do it because they get more respect on the streets and they don't like to be leered at. Now, they dress sharp with their scarf. The girls were joking about one girl had 120 different scarves, and every day she had to choose which one to wear. If it was a solid shirt, it would be a patterned scarf. If it was a patterned shirt, it would be a solid scarf, and they put a little yogurt cup right here so it sticks out a little bit, you see, and that makes it look more fetching. But from a Muslim point of view, they look at America, and you know, we always see extreme examples of each other's cultures from a distance, and that's important for us to remember. But for a Muslim, looking from a conservative Muslim point of view at the United States, we take the most sexy, busty woman, dress her up really tight and skimpy, put her on a revolving platform at a car show, and she sells hot rods. Now, of course we do. And we do it because it's good business. And guys like sexy girls, and we buy cars just because it makes us want to do something fast. Now, somebody who votes for Ahmadinejad in Iran would find that offensive to women. And Ahmadinejad, I went to Iran to try to figure this out. How could 51% of Iran, 70 million people just as decent as us, how could they vote for a guy like Ahmadinejad? Well, a woman told me. She came up to me and she said, are you an American journalist? I said, yeah. She said, I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're strong, we're united, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears. Now, she was afraid because she grew up with the Shah on the throne, put there by the United States in 1953 so we could get access to their oil, to be honest. You know, when the Shah was on the throne, they were bragging the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they are in Paris. That's cool if you like miniskirts. But the moral majority of Iran finds that offensive. And she was so nervous that if we did a regime change and put another Shah on the throne, her little girl would turn into a boy toy, a drug addict, and a crass materialist. That's a very reasonable fear if you're a mother in Iran looking at a Miley Cyrus video. And you've got to understand their baggage and their perspective. And I just like to cut different societies a little slack and realize there's a lot of baggage. I hope people cut us slack when they consider our 9/11 baggage. You know, we lost 3,000 people 13 years ago, and we're 300 million. That was a horrible crime, but come on, let's move on. I know you can't say that and get elected, but you know, we've got to realize everybody's got baggage. And they got baggage that puts our baggage to shame, frankly. And at least we've got to recognize that they have a hard time understanding our baggage, because it seems like we're pretty blessed here. And we don't even take a minute to understand their baggage. What's Iran's baggage? The Iran-Iraq War. In the 1980s, they were invaded by Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, funded by the United States, and Iran lost 300,000 people. That's baggage. Now maybe we should say, get over it. But it's tough to get over it. Every town has a vast martyrs' cemetery. And I went to these martyrs' cemeteries, filled with people died fighting American-funded Saddam Hussein in their perspective. Maybe we don't believe we funded him, but they believe it, and most people do. And you think of a widow watching her sobbing on the tomb of her loved one, as she's done every Friday for 25 years. And you think, that's baggage. That's real. And you can see it in El Salvador, you can see it in India, you can see it in Mexico. There's baggage, and we've got baggage, and they've got baggage. And when you travel, I just think you get an empathy for other people's baggage. Yeah. Question?
Hi, my name is Alex. Thanks for
Hi,
taking
Alex.
the time to speak with us. You've spoken about this a little bit already, but what do you think is a common sentiment in the United States about the outside world that's not an accurate depiction of the reality?
What do I think is a common perception in the United States about the outside world? Well, there's this, that was kind of my whole half hour of talking, is just we look at the rest of the world, and I spent all my good bullets in that. But, you know, the exciting thing is to realize that, you know, we're such a beautiful country, and every time I come back, I'm so thankful that I'm an American, but I'm also really thankful to feel like I'm more of a citizen of this planet. And again, you find people that just see things differently. I love to hang out with Scandinavians. I mean, if you think Europe is challenging, go to Scandinavia. Scandinavia is Europe in the extreme. It's the most educated, most affluent, least church-going, most socialistic, and most content part of Europe by every measure. And hang out with Scandinavians and ask them, you know, why do you do this and why do you do that? And they have their challenges, and they're learning from us, but they sure like their way of government. So a challenge for us when we do travel is to be sure that we travel in a way where we meet other people. Because sadly, you can go all the way to some fascinating country and then come home with your preconceptions affirmed. Or you can go over there and have your preconceptions challenged, depending on how you get out of your comfort zone. I was just in Russia. I jumped ship on a Northern European cruise in St. Petersburg. I was there for 5 days, and each day I hired a different private guide. And I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of hiring private guides. When you look at my TV show, I've got all these friends. I'm just paying them to be my friends. They're private guides. I went down to Central America with the Center for Global Education, and I was just on a private vacation, but I worked with Center for Global Education, and I said, I'd like to hire your best guide in each town so I can have an expert to take me to the market and get me into people's homes. And the interesting thing is, the more valuable the guide is, the cheaper they are. I mean, they're really expensive in England and Ireland, and you don't need them there, really. They're much cheaper and more affordable in Turkey or Morocco or San Salvador or in Russia. So I had 5 different guides on 5 successive days for 4 hours each day, and I got to pick 5 different brains. And I learned, why is Putin so popular in Russia? He's more popular than any president we've ever had, and he's been that popular for a decade, you know. I mean, just consistently, really high approval ratings. And I learned because Russia is about more than democracy. We're just all focused on democracy, but for a lot of societies, there are more fundamental needs. Security, stability, the freedom to travel, relative affluence. Those all trump democracy in the mind of a Russian voter. And they get all that compared to their past with Putin. So we can be all excited about how he's not a good democratic, you know, for democracy. But the Russians really are thankful they can travel, and they're thankful they've got some stability, and they put up with Putin enthusiastically. Now, I was just in Poland a month ago. And I learned how strong Poland is because they have had to survive between Germany and Russia. Everywhere I went in Poland, there were baskets of apples. Every hotel room had a basket of apples in it. Every restaurant, even though we're selling other stuff, had free apples, a whole basket on the table. They were selling apples on the main square, apples on little stands on the freeway. And I realized, oh, Russia is boycotting Poland's apples, and they're really stuck with a glut of apples. And the whole thing in Poland is, piss off Putin, eat an apple. You see? I love to feel the strength of these people, considering what they've gone through and how they're dealing with their challenges today. Another question.
Right in front of you.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for coming. My name is Aline Siston, and I cut America enough slack to be married to one. I was born in Kenya, and as a human rights attorney, I've had the privilege to visit one of IPM's project partners in Italy, where they work with women who've been trafficked and are held captive as sex slaves. So within the context of what you're talking about, legalizing prostitution, I wonder what you have to say about, human trafficking. And also, I'm from Africa, so I was wondering, I know you talked a lot about Europe. I'm wondering about if you have any lessons and analogies to draw from any travels you may have had to Africa.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As far as trafficking and how that relates to prostitution, I certainly didn't mean by saying Europe is pragmatic about not criminalizing prostitutions that it would endorse trafficking, because that's a serious problem. And when I said the prostitute pushes her emergency button and she's normally rescued by a policeman rather than a pimp, I said that's the ideal, I think, but there still are a serious concern about trafficking and pimps and people that are essentially slaves. And that's something that I think needs to be dealt with, just like drug abuse needs to be dealt with, but you don't have to do it in a context where you've got a lot of needless disease and violence and money. I think you can deal at it in a pragmatic harm reduction kind of way. But I don't really know the issue other than it's a legitimate and a serious issue. As far as Africa goes, I've traveled a lot in Morocco and Egypt, but I would love to go to sub-Saharan Africa. And I used to write a book on Asia, and I love, as I said, India is my favorite country. But I'm in this amazing little position as a travel writer where people buy my books, and I've just decided I need to really focus all of my energy on Europe. That's a big beat. And I've got 100 people that work with me, and we just want to make Europe really well organized for our travelers with our guidebooks and our TV shows and our radio shows. I'm almost overstretched with that itself. So I'd love to travel other places. It's just I like my work so much, and I get so much encouragement from people who use my books that if somebody gave me an all expenses paid 2-week trip to anywhere, I would say, no, I really want to go back to Portugal and work on my book there, you see. And that's just where I'm at right now in my life.
Well, first of all, thank you again for being here. My husband and I really love your books, and your Paris book got us to see the nitty-gritty behind the Paris scenes when we lived there for a month. So thank you again for all you do.
You're welcome.
My question is, I would love to know your thoughts about learning the language, the benefits of learning the language when you travel to a certain country. And maybe you can end with any future projects you have going on.
Okay, thank you. As far as the language goes, I am a huge fan of the value of knowing a foreign language in your travels. And having said that, I speak only English. And I make a big deal about the fact that I speak only English because my bottom line is encouraging Americans to be bold enough to reach beyond Orlando. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Orlando is fun 5 or 6 times. But after that, you're ready to graduate into something a little more reality-based instead of la-la-based, because you've got an opportunity when you travel to broaden your perspectives. I mean, a related thing, it's relating to my passion for Central America. I was going down to Mazatlan with my family. Once I was tired, overworked, I needed a vacation. I was fantasizing about a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff. I was going to be enjoying this with my wealthy white American friends, a plastic strap on my wrist so I wouldn't have to dirty my fingers in the local coins and get all the margaritas I wanted, these resorts. And then my friend said, it's the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero in San Salvador, and it would be great if you wanted to join people down there and march in the streets and remember Romero. I told my family, I'm not going to be any fun on the beach. I got to go to El Salvador. And I went to El Salvador, and 2 days into that experience, I was covered with bug bites, eating rice and beans one day and beans and rice the next. Having the time of my life. It was no more dangerous or expensive than going to Mazatlan, but it was life-changing. I was marching with these people. I was buoyed by people who have, in their own lifetime, their Nathan Hale, or whatever you want to call it. He said, "I'll be assassinated," as he stood with the people and the landless peasants in that civil war. Certainly he was killed, and he said, "I'll rise again in my people," and he rose again in his people. And 25 years later, I was there, marching with the people who were, Romero was there, and it was so powerful. And why Americans don't do that, I don't understand. It's just perverse that an American would do that. But it's accessible. Anybody can do it. So there is that option we have, Mazatlan or, Managua, and we have to make those choices. I'm getting away from your question. Sorry about that. Very quickly, what was the first question?
About the language, learning.
Oh, the language barrier. So I didn't speak the local language there, but I had guides and I had people that come up and talk to me in Spanish. In my teaching, I always make it really clear. We speak the world's linguistic common denominator. If a Norwegian meets a Greek hiking in the Alps, they communicate in English, broken English. What Greek speaks Norwegian? It just doesn't happen very much. Now, the interesting thing is, the smaller the language where you'd expect, Estonia, how are we going to work there, Well, the smaller the language, the more necessary it is for educated people to learn another language, and they're going to learn a language that gives them some reach, and it's going to be English. The biggest language barriers in Europe for me are Italy, Spain, and France, because you can speak Spanish and have a huge world and not need to speak English. So we speak the language that works. It's just politeness to learn local words and try to learn more as you go. But bottom line is, don't let your linguistic shortcomings get in the way of where your travel dreams are taking you. I've been able to make my TV shows, lead my tours, write my guidebooks, have great vacations anywhere in Europe speaking English. So that's kind of the good news about that. And my future projects, I'm so thankful for my gig in public television, and for 20 years, every 2 years, we bring out a new series. Just this season, we've got 12 new shows. I'm very enthusiastic about what I learned in the Holy Land, so we have a 1-hour special on the Holy Land that's airing on public television all over the country. And I've got 30 guidebooks out covering all of Europe, and it's just my passion to make those as accurate as we can. We have this old-fashioned idea of actually visiting every place in every book in person so that it's right up to date, so people can use these guidebooks and enjoy, I hope, maximum travel thrills per mile, minute, and dollar on their upcoming vacation. What a fun opportunity to share my love of travel. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you. Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a Friday forum with author and travel expert Rick Steves. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.